Long before the word Halloween was ever whispered, there was fire in the dark. The people of the ancient world looked to the stars, the turning of the seasons, and the slow death of the harvest sun. They named this threshold Samhain, a night when the year itself dissolved into mystery, when the veil between worlds grew thin, and the living could feel the breath of the dead upon the wind. These early peoples did not fear the dark in the way we imagine. To them, death was not an ending, but a passage. The land of spirits, called Tir na Nog, was no hell, no heaven, but a continuation of life in another form. Fires were kindled on high hills, bright against the autumn night, mirroring the sun now waning in the sky. These flames were more than warmth. They were prayers, guardians, and symbols of divine renewal. Through the smoke, voices rose in song, footsteps drummed upon the earth, and offerings were cast into the blaze, gifts for ancestors who might walk among the living once more. Samhain was no ordinary festival. It was the hinge of time, the end of the light half of the year and the beginning of the dark. The herds were brought home from summer pastures, the fields lay bare, and the earth prepared for sleep. But on that one night, boundaries loosened. The fae, the spirits, even gods and shadows could slip between worlds. To walk outside on Samhain night was to walk in both realms at once. It is here, in the smoke of sacred fires and the hush of autumn fields, that the roots of Halloween first took hold. Among the Celtic tribes, Samhain was more than a festival. It was the very axis upon which the wheel of the year turned. Their lives were bound to the earth's rhythms, and so too were their souls. The Druids, white-robed priests, poets, and seers, guarded this threshold with rites that spoke to both sky and soil. They knew the whispers of the oak, the flight of the raven, the language of stars. On sowing night, they kindled the sacred bonfires, breathing incantations that rose with the sparks, carrying prayers upward into the velvet dark. It was said that no hearth fire could burn without first receiving flame from the Druids' blaze. Villagers gathered embers from these sacred fires to relight their homes, carrying protection and renewal into the winter months. Around the circle of light, stories were told. Tales of gods who rode out in the wild hunt, of spirits who wandered crossroads, of lovers reunited across death's divide. The Druids were not only priests but guides who reminded their people that life and death were a cycle, each flowing into the other like day into night. On this night of thinned veils, masks and disguises were worn, not as play, but as protection. If the spirits of the other world wandered too close, one could confuse them, blending among them in strange attire. Food and offerings were left upon thresholds, tokens of respect for wandering souls, and a hope that kindness would keep mischief at bay. The Celts did not see sowing as sinister, but as sacred. It was a night to honor ancestors, to speak with the unseen, and to embrace mystery. In their world, there was no sharp line between magic and life. The two were one. And so sowing was both a harvest feast and a communion with eternity, both joy and solemnity, both fire and shadow. In time, the world around them would shift, Rome's empire rising, Christianity spreading its cloak, new rituals reshaping the old. Yet the heart of Samhain, the fire, the mask, the honoring of the dead, would survive every change, carried like an ember into the centuries that followed. When Rome's legions pressed their iron into Celtic soil, they did not erase the old ways but mingled with them, as conquerors so often do. Samhain, with its fires and shadows, met the Roman festivals of the harvest. Chief among them was the feast of Pomona, goddess of orchards and ripened fruit. Her gifts were apples, hanging like suns in autumn branches, and it is whispered that the game of bobbing for apples, still played on Halloween nights, is a fragment of her worship that never died. The Romans also brought Feralia, a day set aside to honor the spirits of the dead, and Lemuria, a rite to appease restless souls. These observances twined with Samhain like vines around an oak, blending the memory of ancestors with the bounty of harvest. Over time, the boundaries between Celtic and Roman ways softened, and the people found themselves celebrating a festival that was both old and new, sacred and playful, solemn and abundant. It was in this mingling that Halloween began to take its first shape as a crossroads of cultures, no longer belonging only to the Druids and Celts, but to all who felt the veil thin and the spirits stir. Apples bobbed in water, fruits and grains were offered to the gods, fires burned high, and still the masks were worn, for even the Romans knew that the dead and the living sometimes crossed paths when autumn's breath grew cold. Thus Samhain was not extinguished by Rome, but transformed, carrying with it the seeds of what would one day become Halloween's orchard of symbols, games, and ghostly lore. As centuries turned, a new faith swept across the old lands, cloaked in incense and hymn, its bells ringing where once only the Druids' chants had echoed. Christianity looked upon Samhain with wary eyes, for here was a night steeped in fire, masks, and communion with the dead, practices the Church feared but could not fully banish. And so, as it often did, it sought not to destroy, but to transform. The Feast of All Saints was fixed to the 1st of November, sanctifying the memory of martyrs and holy ones. The eve before it, All Hallows Eve, fell upon the very night the Celts had long held sacred. In time, the names blurred together: Samhain, All Hallows, Halloween, but beneath the new garments, the old spirit still stirred. The bells rang for saints, yet in the hearths of villagers, candles still burned for ancestors. Priests spoke of heaven and hell, yet the people still whispered of fairies, spirits, and the wandering dead. The Church encouraged prayers for souls in purgatory, and offerings became soul cakes, small breads given to the poor, who in return prayed for the departed of the household. Thus, a sacred transaction of food and blessing echoed the ancient practice of leaving gifts at the door for the unseen. Children and beggars went from house to house, and in their voices one can hear the earliest echoes of trick or treat. Yet the Church's shadow also cast fear. Where once spirits were guides and kin, they were now painted as demons. Masks that once protected became signs of mischief, and fires once sacred were condemned as pagan remnants. Still, the people clung to their customs, for memory runs deeper than dogma, and in every flickering candle lit on All Hallows Eve, the fire of Samhain continued to glow. Through the late Middle Ages and into the long, fearful centuries that followed, the old night of Samhain became tangled with suspicion. The Church, eager to root out remnants of the old ways, branded the healers, the midwives, the wise folk who still kept herb and charm as servants of the devil. What had once been holy firelight was now cast as witch fire. What had once been communion with ancestors was twisted into pacts with demons. The witch hunt swept like storms across Europe, fed by fear, famine, and the need for scapegoats. Women, and men too, were dragged before tribunals, accused of flying through the night, of dancing with spirits, of casting spells on cattle and crops. The liminal night of All Hallows, already heavy with superstition, became ever more haunted in the popular imagination. Shadows in the lane were no longer wandering souls, but witches abroad. The owl's cry was not omen, but threat. It was in these centuries that Halloween, once the tender threshold of ancestor veneration, grew its darker mask. Black cats, owls, and bats, all creatures of night were woven into its lore as companions of witches. The bonfire, once sacred, was now seen as a devil's gathering place. The veil was no longer honored, but feared. And yet, even in this grim recasting, the heart of the festival endured. The masks, the fires, the offerings at the door, all remained. For though rulers may condemn, the people's love for mystery, for story, for ritual is not so easily extinguished. Halloween bent beneath the weight of witch trials and sermons, but it did not break. When ships left Europe's shores for the promise and peril of the New World, they carried not only tools and dreams, but also memories. Among the Irish and the Scots especially, Samhain's shadowed customs sailed with them, tucked into song and story, waiting to find new soil. In the colonies of early America, the rigid Puritans frowned upon such pagan observances, their faith too severe to allow fires for the dead or masks against wandering spirits. And so, for a time, Halloween slumbered quietly in the New World, its presence faint, found only in whispered tales, hushed games, and immigrant enclaves. Yet memory is patient. As the centuries turned, Irish immigrants brought Samhain's flame back to life in America with fresh vigor. During the great waves of immigration in the 19th century, when famine drove thousands across the Atlantic, the customs of All Hallows Eve, carving faces into gourds, lighting lanterns, telling ghost stories, were planted firmly into American soil. The native pumpkin, bright and round, became the perfect canvas for the ancient art of warding spirits with light. What once had been turnips carved in Europe now glowed as grinning jack-o'-lanterns on American porches. Games, too, crossed the sea, fortune-telling with apples, playful dares in the dark, tales of love and spirits whispered at harvest gatherings. Communities, eager for both celebration and release, took to Halloween as a night of mischief and mystery. It was here, in the young land of America, that the festival began its metamorphosis, from solemn rite of death and remembrance into a carnival of play, fear, and delight. No longer only Samhain, nor only All Hallows, Halloween became its own creature, reborn in the fertile soil of a new world. By the time the Victorian age cast its lace across the Western world, Halloween had become a night of mystery not only for the village green, but also for the parlor. The Victorians, with their fascination for death, mourning, and the spirit world, embraced Halloween as a season of whispered fortunes and playful encounters with the unknown. Mirrors were gazed into at midnight, candles flickering in hopes of glimpsing the face of a future husband. Cards were drawn, nuts were burned in hearth fires, and shadows on the wall were read like auguries. Beneath the playful surface, the old hunger remained, the desire to peer beyond the veil, to touch the hidden, to court destiny under autumn's spell. Ghost stories bloomed in these gatherings, tales of spirits and omens that thrilled as much as they frightened. Spiritualism itself, with its seances, mediums, and messages from beyond, thrived in this era, and Halloween was the perfect stage for its mysteries. Yet for all its somber tones, the Victorians also wrapped Halloween in romance and whimsy. Lanterns glowed, masks returned in masquerades, and the night became both a playground and a seance. It was during this age that Halloween began to settle into a balance. No longer only the fearful night of witches, nor only the sacred fires of Samhain, but a cultural festival of games, tales, and gatherings. The Victorians gave Halloween a parlor, a candlelit elegance, and a sense of playful dread that still lingers in the holiday today. As the new century dawned, Halloween in America left the parlor and spilled into the streets. Communities embraced it not just as a night of fortune games, but as a festival of neighborhood celebration. Parades wound through small towns, lanterns glowing, children in costume, trailing laughter behind them. Schools and churches held parties, mixing merriment with the lingering thrill of the uncanny. But alongside joy, mischief ran wild. In the early 1900s, Halloween was as much a night of pranks as of play. Gates were unhinged, wagons overturned, windows soaped, and fences toppled under the cloak of darkness. To many, the holiday was becoming unruly, a night when spirits, both real and human, caused chaos. Communities sought to tame the mischief with organized festivities, transforming Halloween into a night of controlled revelry. It was in this era that the custom of trick-or-treating truly began to crystallize. Rooted in the old practice of souling in Europe and carried forward in America by children seeking candy rather than prayers, the exchange became a pact of sorts: give a treat or face a trick. By mid-century, this tradition had spread across the nation, making Halloween the children's holiday it is known as today. Jack-o'-lanterns grinned from porches, costumes ranged from the whimsical to the ghostly, and candy replaced chaos as the currency of the night. What had once been sacred ritual had become a secular celebration, yet the essence remained the same: a night of masks, mystery, and the dance between the living and the dead. The 20th century was an age of extremes, of war and wonder, hardship and prosperity, and Halloween, too, bore these tides. During the years of the Great Depression, the mischief of the night sometimes tipped into true vandalism, as hungry children and restless youth found chaos more accessible than candy. Communities, longing for safety and joy, responded by nurturing trick-or-treating as a gentler custom, channeling wildness into door-to-door delight. Then came the Second World War, and with it, scarcity. Sugar was rationed, and so Halloween sweets all but vanished. Yet even in those lean years, the spirit of the night endured. Pumpkins still flickered with carved faces, children still dressed in makeshift masks, and stories of ghosts still wandered the October dark. Halloween proved resilient, surviving even the bleakest of times. When the war ended and prosperity bloomed in the 1950s, Halloween erupted into full color. Candy flowed freely again, and companies saw in the holiday a golden opportunity. Costumes, once handmade or improvised, now appeared in bright cellophane packages, transforming children into cowboys, princesses, skeletons, and superheroes. Television, too, cast its spell, with spooky specials and cartoon pumpkins, embedding Halloween into the very fabric of American culture. By the latter half of the century, Halloween was no longer a faint echo of Europe's past, but a distinctly American celebration, pulsing with parades, horror films, haunted houses, and candy by the bagful. It had become both a commercial juggernaut and a beloved ritual, blending ancient echoes with modern spectacle. And yet, beneath the costumes and wrappers, something older still stirred: the thrill of darkness, the joy of disguise, the whisper that the veil grows thin as October wanes. In the modern age, Halloween wears many masks. It is at once a children's carnival of candy, a night of haunted houses and horror films, a time for parties, parades, and elaborate costumes. In cities and suburbs alike, jack-o'-lanterns still grin from porches, their candlelight recalling the ancient fires of Samhain. Yet alongside the playfulness runs a current far older: the thrill of stepping into shadow, of donning a mask and becoming something other, if only for a night. In America, Halloween has grown into one of the great festivals of the year, rivaled only by Christmas in its reach. Horror movies line cinema screens, pumpkin patches glow in autumn fields, and shops overflow with costumes from the terrifying to the whimsical. Adults as much as children take part, seizing the chance to shed the ordinary and step into fantasy. The night has become a theater where fear is safe, where darkness is danced with, and where the ancient hunger for story, disguise, and mystery finds its stage. Yet Halloween is no longer bound only to America. Its orange glow has spread across the world, to Europe, where it returns in a new form to the lands of its birth and beyond to countries that embrace its blend of play and dread. Though commercialized, Halloween still bears the imprint of all its ancestors: the bonfires of the Celts, the apples of Pomona, the soul cakes of Christendom, the witch lore of the Middle Ages, the jack-o'-lanterns of Irish immigrants, the parades and candy of America. It is the festival of the threshold, the night when the world remembers, in laughter, in fear, in disguise, that the veil is thin and the dead walk near. Beneath every mask, every flickering lantern, every sugared delight, Halloween holds a deeper truth. It is the truth of cycles, of harvest and hunger, of life and death, of endings that are never endings at all. Long before modern costumes and candy, our ancestors lit fires on hilltops to honor this mystery, to remind themselves that darkness, too, is sacred. Halloween is a memory carried in the blood of generations. It is the laughter of children and the whisper of ancestors, the rustle of costumes and the sigh of the autumn wind through bare branches. It is a reminder that we are part of a story far older than ourselves, one in which the veil between worlds is thin and time folds back on itself like a shadow. In honoring Halloween, we honor both the living and the dead, both the joy of the harvest and the fear of the dark. We acknowledge that the world is more than what we see by day, that mystery breathes just beyond the edges of the known. And perhaps this is why the holiday endures, because it touches something eternal in us. The Celts called it sowing. The church called it All Hallows Eve. The world now calls it Halloween. But whatever the name, the essence remains. A night of thresholds when we step for a moment between worlds and remember that death is not an end, but a passage. So when the candles are lit, when the costumes are donned, when laughter and shivers mingle in the October night, know that you are part of an ancient dance. A dance of shadow and flame, of endings and beginnings, of the eternal mystery that binds us all. For on Halloween the veil is thin, and through it, eternity whispers.